When most people hear the name Joseph Stalin, they think about his obsession with ultimate power and his relentless quest to conquer all those who dared stand against his authority. His obsession resulted in thousands of deaths, large-scale executions, and several purges. One of the most chilling purges happened within the Soviet Army. Welcome to Before Now. In this video, we'll take a look at a critical aspect of Stalin's purge that many have not considered. This is the story of the Red Army Purge. The Russian Civil War, which the Soviet Union won in 1922, greatly influenced their future policies. Their army consisted mostly of peasants and cavalry, relying heavily on officials to maintain loyalty. Even though the war was over, the 1920s and early 1930s were rife with anxiety about potential conflicts with capitalist powers. As Stalin declared in 1931, "We are 50 to 100 years behind advanced countries. We must bridge this gap within 10 years or face annihilation." Under Stalin and the Bolshevik Party, the Soviet Union underwent rapid modernization. The 5-year plan aggressively expanded industry and agriculture, but this came at the expense of millions of lives. It was during this period that Mikhail Tukhachevsky took command of the Red Army. He introduced a revolutionary military doctrine known as deep battle, which bore similarities to the German Blitzkrieg, visualizing swarms of tanks and aircraft dominating battlefields. Tukhachevsky spearheaded a massive buildup of the army's armored and air forces. His ambitious reforms sought to transform the Red Army from its peasant-based, cavalry-driven origins during the Civil War into a cutting-edge military force. As part of these reforms, most of the Red Army's commissars were removed. By 1941, Tukhachevsky had established the world's largest tank and air forces. However, despite these advancements, the Red Army in the 1930s remained largely peasant-based, with significant gaps in equipment beyond tanks and aircraft. This was glaringly evident during the Battle of Dubno in 1941, where Soviet soldiers marched on foot due to a shortage of trucks. Meanwhile, other units like the regular rifle divisions relied on horse-drawn wagons for artillery and supplies. Even so, the Red Army's tank and air superiority signaled a dramatic shift from its Civil War roots. The Soviet Union was not just accumulating equipment, it was also mobilizing riflemen to prepare for war. This was driven by Germany's increasing military power, Italy's aggression, and Hitler's explicit ambitions to expand eastward. And just as the Red Army was expanding, preparing for the looming war, Stalin's purges struck. In 1937, Stalin targeted high-ranking officers and commanders. Fabricated accusations led to confessions under torture, and trials were conducted in secret. The charges were often absurd, involving treason, sabotage, and conspiracy with foreign powers. Among the victims of the purge were some of the Red Army's most brilliant and experienced commanders, including Mikhail Tukhachevsky. Klement Voroshilov, the Soviet defense official and namesake of the KV tanks, played a significant role in the Great Purge. Voroshilov harbored a personal vendetta against Tukhachevsky, whose support for tank warfare clashed with Voroshilov's cavalry preferences. As a veteran of the Civil War and the Polish-Soviet War, Voroshilov was in a powerful position to bring down Tukhachevsky. The Soviet military, previously untouched by the purge, became a target when Voroshilov announced the arrest of top generals on June 11, 1937. Tukhachevsky, a visionary military leader, was among the first to be arrested. He advocated for mechanization, armored forces, and modern tactics. Despite his contributions, he was falsely accused of plotting a coup against Stalin. Under brutal torture, Tukhachevsky confessed to fabricated crimes. His family was imprisoned, and he was eventually executed. After his execution, the purge intensified. Victims implicated each other in a desperate attempt to save their own lives. Iona Yakir was another victim, much like Tukhachevsky. Yakir, a highly respected commander who had fought in the Russian Civil War and suppressed uprisings against the Bolsheviks, was arrested in 1937 and executed after a secret trial. 2 of the 5 Soviet marshals were executed. Unsurprisingly, Voroshilov, who had orchestrated the charges against Tukhachevsky, survived the purge. Semyon Budyonny, a Stalin loyalist with a background in cavalry warfare, also avoided persecution. In a terrifying show of power, Stalin, Voroshilov, and Nikolai Yezhov convened a conference where soldiers were coerced into denouncing alleged conspirators. Often unaware of the charges against them, the accused were arrested on the spot. This sinister event marked one of the darkest chapters in Soviet history, as the purge spiraled out of control, claiming countless lives. The purge eventually claimed the lives of 3 marshals, 6 army commanders, 13 corps commanders, and countless other officers. Many of these individuals were highly skilled and experienced military leaders whose expertise could have proven invaluable in the coming war. Although their loss significantly weakened the Red Army and left it ill-prepared for the challenges it would soon face. The Red Army purge was far more extensive than the execution of a few high-ranking officers. While their deaths were significant due to their influence and expertise, the purge affected tens of thousands of military personnel across all ranks. Estimates suggest that approximately 35,000 army leaders were discharged, and tens of thousands of officers were arrested. Thousands were executed, while many others were sent to the Gulag labor camps or imprisoned. Check out our previous videos to have a glimpse of what the Gulag camps looked like. It wasn't just a random camp, it was hell. As the purge ravaged the Red Army's leadership, the remaining soldiers were left with the enormous job of defending the Soviet Union from the Nazi invasion. However, Stalin's paranoia gave way to one more technique to ensure soldiers' loyalty to the Soviet Union. For this, he created a system called blocking detachments. The blocking detachments were evidence of the severe measures Stalin took to maintain control over his military. To avoid panic within ranks, retreat, or surrender, Stalin issued Order Number 227, a cruel measure that introduced the concept of blocking detachments. These were special units largely made up of his trustworthy NKVD secret police, and their role was to prevent soldiers from deserting their duty. They were ordered to torture using any method or even kill as an example for anyone trying to withdraw from the war. The blocking detachment fulfilled its purpose, which was to create fear and discipline, forcing soldiers to follow orders and fight to the death. But this strategy, like most of Stalin's strategies, was so horrible that it led to unnecessary casualties and further loss of spirit in the armies. While the actual number of soldiers killed by blocking detachments remains unknown, it's clear that they contributed to the war's massive human loss. Despite the impact of the purges, the Red Army was forced to face the full might of the German war machine. In the early hours of June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. The Red Army, caught off guard, suffered heavy losses in the initial weeks of the war. Stalin, already prone to paranoia, became convinced that treason within the military was to blame for the setbacks. One of the first high-ranking officers to fall victim to Stalin's wrath was General Dmitry Pavlov, the commander of the Western Front. Pavlov was arrested on June 30, 1941, and charged with treason, cowardice, and criminal negligence. A kangaroo court-martial was hastily convened, and Pavlov was found guilty. He was executed by firing squad on July 22, 1941. Pavlov's execution marked the beginning of a wider purge within the Red Army. Over the next few months, hundreds of officers were arrested, tortured, and executed on trumped-up charges. The purge created a climate of fear and mistrust within the military, making it even more difficult for the Red Army to mount an effective defense against the German invasion. The early stages of Operation Barbarossa exposed the weakness in the Soviet army, all thanks to Stalin's paranoia. Experienced commanders were either already dead or in prison. They were then replaced by less qualified but loyal officers, struggling to adapt to the fast-paced German blitzkrieg tactics. The defeats were massive. Cities under the sovereignty of the Soviets fell. Millions of soldiers were captured or slaughtered, and large territories were conquered by the Nazis. However, the Soviet soldiers were not to be trifled with. Driven by patriotism and a desire to defend their homeland, they began to rally. Under the command of Georgy Zhukov and Konstantin Rokossovsky, the Red Army became stabilized. The turning point for the Soviet army was at the Battle of Stalingrad. It was a long and hard fight, but they fought viciously and won. The Red Army's victory there marked a significant turning point, demonstrating the tough and brave nature of the Soviet soldiers. After that, the Soviet army ventured into the offensive path, with pivotal battles such as the Battle of Kursk and the liberation of Eastern Europe, which eventually led to the defeat of Nazi Germany. However, the damages caused by Stalin's purges continued to haunt the Red Army. The loss of so many talented officers and the erosion of trust within the military had long-lasting consequences. The Soviet Union emerged from a war victoriously, but at what cost? For some, Stalin's paranoia birthed grave consequences that still linger to this day. For most historians, the purge may not have impacted the Soviets greatly, but what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a thumbs up and subscribe to Before Now for more thrilling revelations. Until next time.